Eileen Philipp-Horn, Suhas Subramaniam, Jennifer Boysko, and David Reed. Our conversation will be moderated by JDCA CEO Haley Sofer. Again, thank you for joining us. Now over to Haley to get us started.
Thank you so much, Cookie. I'm Haley Sofer, CEO of JDCA, and I want to welcome our 6 candidates and all of you viewing today's Issues Forum for the Virginia 10th District Democratic primary. As the political home and voice of Jewish voters, advocating for policies and supporting Democrats who share our values, JDCA is mobilizing millions of voters across the country, helping them make informed decisions at the ballot box with forums like this one. Before we begin, I will quickly go over the rules, which have been shared in advance with the candidates. First, this is an issues forum and not a debate. Candidates will answer the questions by addressing the audience. They will not engage with, address, or refer directly to one another. Second, there will be no rebuttals. If there's a violation of this rule, candidates will receive a warning. After that, we will mute candidates for violation of the rule. Third, this is not a campaign event. Candidates will not ask for your vote or financial support. They will share their views on a range of issues of importance to Jewish voters. Fourth, there will be time limits. Candidates will have 1 minute for introductory remarks, followed by questions, which they will then have 1 minute each to answer. We will rotate the order for responses, and at the end of the forum, candidates will have the opportunity to make 90-second closing statements. As a reminder, we kindly ask the candidates to adhere to the time limits and the rules. We will keep time throughout the forum with a Zoom timer that the candidates can see. When time has expired, a bell will ring, which will sound like this. And then they will know time is up. Now that we've gone over the rules, we are ready to begin the forum, starting with opening statements. With their permission, we will address all candidates by their first name and proceed in alphabetical order of first names, and then we will rotate. So we will start with Dan, followed by David, Eileen, Jennifer, Crystal, and Suhas. Dan, you can start us off with your opening statement.
Well, thank you so much, Haley. Thank you to everybody who's joining. I'm Delegate Dan Helmer. I'm the son of an Israeli immigrant, the grandson of Holocaust survivors. I've always stood up to extremists who threaten our democracy. It's why after the attacks on 9/11, I served in Afghanistan. That's why after Donald Trump's election, I got involved in politics and unseated a 17-year Republican incumbent in the State House. It's why in 2021, after the attacks on January 6th, I wrote the law to ban January 6th insurrectionists from holding office. And it's why after an extreme Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, I led the successful effort to flip the State House in Virginia, making sure we could protect abortion rights in the only Southern state where they haven't been banned. I'm proud to have been endorsed in this race by the Washington Post, who knows that we need a fighter who stands up to extremists, is an effective legislator, and makes sure we win the toughest race. And I'm excited to have this conversation with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. David.
So Haley and JDCA and everyone, thank you so much for having me here today. This is really a very great way to be able to discuss these issues for everyone. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to start by just sharing a little bit of information about myself, because throughout this, we're going to be able to actually address some very specific information about the topics and the issues of the day through your 8 questions. But I want you to know that I'm someone who grew up very poor in the mountains of Virginia. I'm the first person in my family to ever get a college degree. I have lived here in the 10th Congressional District now for 24 years, and I think that residency is something that's really very important. I remember going back to the time when I was in college and I decided that I owed something back to the nation, and that's the reason why I joined the Navy in 1988. It's the reason why I ran for delegate in 2017 and why I'm now running for Congress in 2024. I want to be able to give back and continue to serve and help others have the same opportunity that I had.
Great. Thank you so much. Eileen.
Thanks so much, Haley, and thanks so much to JDCA. I'm Eileen Thiller-Corn, the 56th Speaker of the Virginia House of Delegates, and I'm running for Congress because now more than ever, we need women on the front lines defending our rights and our freedom. I was raised with the idea of giving back to the community as essential. Tikkun Olam was a frequent refrain and has been a guiding principle in my life. As a mom, as delegate, and eventually the first woman and the first Jewish person to ever serve as Speaker of the House, my mission has always been to protect families. Tikkun Olam is not abstract to me, it's my guiding principle. Our nation and its democracy need repair, and I'm running to represent Virginia's 10th congressional district to do just that. As the first woman to be Speaker of the House, I took on Republicans. I led the charge, rolling back extreme right-wing abortion restrictions and protected our democracy, holding election deniers accountable. Now it's time to take that fight to Congress to codify Roe and to protect our democracy. I'm proud to be endorsed by Governor Ralph Northam, Attorney General Mark Herring, Congressman Jamie Raskin, Congresswoman Kathy Manning, and so many others. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Haley, and JDCA for having us tonight. I'm honored to be with you today. I come from a family. My father's an Episcopal priest who is now retired. My mom was a nurse. I watched when they split up. Unfortunately, I watched my mom struggle with economic issues, and that's really been that and education have been the two cornerstones of the work that I have done, fighting for things like access to education for everyone at the higher level, carrying the DREAM Act, being the leader in the Senate on reproductive health issues and paid family and medical leave and equal pay. This past 5 years, I have served in the Senate representing about 200,000 residents in this district, which is about a quarter of the entire 10th district. I have been very busy in leadership and serving on 5 different committees, including transportation chair, was a budget conferee helping negotiate the budget, the only one from Northern Virginia in the Senate. And we served on 15 boards and commissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Crystal Call, originally from Long Island, New York. I'm the daughter and granddaughter of Indian immigrants. I'm the only woman who's lives in Loudoun who's running for this seat. I'm a former senior defense official. I was a GS-15, which is the highest civilian rank at the DoD. I resigned in protest of Trump because I found that he put women and minorities in a toxic environment and put our troops at risk. I'm a small business owner. I run a defense tech firm helping disadvantaged minority businesses. I believe strongly in, helping people here in VA-10. I've walked their shoes. I understand the struggles here on the ground. I believe strongly in women's reproductive health freedoms. I worked with UN Women, helping disenfranchised women around the world. I want to promote, common sense gun safety laws. I have lived in different conflict zones, and I've seen the effects of gun violence. And I want to fight MAGA extremists. I think that it's really critical that we do so to make sure that we uphold democracy and move our country forward. And I come in with a lot of real world experience.
And Suhas.
Hi, everyone. I'm Suhas Subramaniam. I'm the state senator in Eastern Loudoun County, and I'm proud to be running for the U.S. Congress. I'm a father of 2 girls, 4 and 2. I served at the Loudoun County area as a volunteer firefighter. I've served in the Obama White House as a technology advisor and even as a voter protection attorney in the past. And as a state senator, I established a long track record of taking on really tough fights and winning. Whether it was the monopoly utility companies, where I took on them and tried to get people and was successfully able to get people $300 million in refunds on their utility bills, or was passing several gun regulations by taking on the NRA. I've always prioritized family and service, and I want to make sure we build a better future for my kids. And proud to be endorsed by Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton herself, as well as Senate Majority Leader Scott Sturville and Senator Russell Perry. And I hope to earn your support as well.
Thank you very much to all of our candidates for those opening statements. We will now move into questions on a range of issues of importance to Jewish voters, starting with democracy. On January 6, 2021, violent insurrectionists incited by former President Donald Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power and avoid certification of the 2020 election in Joe Biden's favor. Thankfully, our democracy withstood the attack, but since launching his presidential campaign, Donald Trump has once again refused to commit to accepting the results of this election. Trump said openly he would be a dictator on day one, and he has invoked Nazi rhetoric. The future of democracy was the #1 issue for Jewish voters in the 2020 election, and likely will be so again in 2024. What steps are you taking to defend democracy amid these persistent Republican threats? We'll start with David, followed by Eileen, Jennifer, Crystal, Suhas, and Dan. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Haley. And this is something that's so very important, because when we will go out and talk with people and you will ask them in general, what are the issues that are most concerning to you? Usually you either end up with #1, the threats to our democracy, or one, a threat to women's reproductive rights. And I will tell you that they are both very, very closely intertwined. The thing that I remember on that particular day on January the 6th of just being so shocked, because again, I had taken the oath of office in 1988 to be able to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, did that for 23 years as a Navy intel officer, and then retook that same type of oath again when I began serving in the Virginia General Assembly in 2017. I have introduced legislation that would have prohibited individuals who participated in the January 6th insurrection from being able to serve. And I have also continued to work to be able to strengthen our democracy. And we've got to be able to maintain the majority in the Senate, retake the House, and maintain the majority and maintain President Biden. That's the first step to being able to be sure that we protect our democracy.
Thank you, Eileen.
Thanks so much for that question. Yes, that is one of the top issues as I campaign and travel around. Everybody's concerned about. And I believe strongly that our democratic values are what makes America exceptional. It's been really troubling to see so many attacks across our democracy. And as we've discussed and as you've heard, means different things to different people. But we heard, as you said, that Trump said he's going to be a dictator on day one when he's reelected. And this year's election is far more about right or like it's left. It's more about, I like to talk about it in terms of democracy versus dictatorship, literally. As Speaker of the House, I stood up to the MAGA Republicans. I took swift action against election deniers. We passed eight new voting right reforms, making voting more easier for all eligible voters to cast their ballots. We were 49th in the country for level difficulty voting, and then we moved to 12th after my speakership. Virginia now is the most progressive voting rights laws in the South. And in Congress, I'll continue to strengthen our democracy right here at home and certainly work to restore the voting rights as well.
Jennifer.
Thank you so much. In the Senate of Virginia, we had one of those election deniers who was at January 6th. Her name is Amanda Chase. And I co-patroned a censure for her, saying that we then took her off of all of her committees, and we put her in an area where she was not given any sort of leadership or ability to continue to push against election denying. I served for 3 years on a national group that dealt with explored the civics health of our democracy. It was a bipartisan group, and we looked at things like making sure that we had pushing for electoral reforms, making sure that we are supporting democracy. I sat on a panel with former governor, the senior Beshear from Kentucky, to present this with them. I served on the Privileges and Elections Committee, both the House and the Senate, and again, preserving the new laws that we made in Virginia, making sure that we're focusing on preserving our elections and integrity is very high level and important to me.
Thank you, Crystal.
Sorry, I had to unmute there. Yes. So I think first and foremost, we have to defend our democratic institutions. My career with the CIA, Air Force, with the Department of Defense has given me firsthand experience about protecting our nation's democratic institutions. That's a big reason as to why I actually resigned in protest of Trump, because I felt that our institutions were being put at risk. I took an oath to defend our democracy from extremists, both foreign and domestic. And I've seen the dangers that arise. I think number two, we have to uphold rule of law, ensure that rule of law is respected, make sure that we maintain a healthy democracy, and support robust investigations into any actions that undermine it. We need to protect voting rights. Democracy thrives when everyone has an equal opportunity to participate. And I want to make sure that I fight to do that and fight for, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, for example. And then combating disinformation is something that I know intimately well. In a lot of my work I did with the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, making sure. Thank you.
Suhas.
Thank you. It's a great question. I mean, I've been fighting for protecting democracy my whole life. I was a voter protection attorney in the Obama re-election campaign, and I saw, some of the worst of our democracy with polling locations having the wrong hours and not enough ballots printed. And now it's gotten worse. And January 6th was, should be the end, but could be only the start of what's worse and what could come. We don't stand up to Trump and MAGA Republicans who want to undermine our democracy for their benefit. We have to make sure we also protect the federal workforce. Trump has not only said he wants to be a dictator and he wants to have several more terms in office, he wants to get rid of the federal workforce, many of whom live here in our county. And we also need campaign finance reform as well. We need to make sure that people have a voice and are not drowned out by corporate influences. And so I want to make sure that we are protecting our democracy from top to bottom, and I will do so in Congress.
Thank you. Dan.
Yeah, as the son of an Israeli immigrant, as the grandson of Holocaust survivors, defending our democracy is central to who I am. And I encourage everybody watching today to go look at our ad in which we feature just how important defending democracy is to us in our campaign. In 2018, I went on TV and said that after 9/11, the greatest threat to our democracy lived in a cave. And now the greatest threat to our democracy is Donald Trump. And we saw that play out on January 6th, when MAGA extremists led by Donald Trump, supported by neo-Nazis and white supremacists, attacked our Capitol, trying to overturn an election. We see it today in an extreme Supreme Court that overturned a 50-year right to abortion. We see it in Supreme Court justices who have flown Stop the Steal flags over their home. Today, we need strong leaders in Congress who will stand up for our democracy at every turn, have done so all their lives. It's exactly the kind of leader I've been in the State House. It's the kind of leader I will be on the Hill.
Thank you. We'll now move to our second question. President Biden has championed gun control measures, passing the most significant gun control package in 30 years, establishing the first ever White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, and addressing the root causes of gun violence in our communities. He's repeatedly called on Congress to take additional action, including expanding background check requirements, banning assault weapons, and requiring safe storage of guns. If elected to Congress, what steps would you take to combat the epidemic of gun violence that has plagued our communities and our schools? We will start with Eileen, followed by Jennifer, Crystal, Suhas, Dan, and David. Eileen.
Thank you so much. Some of you might know my story. This issue is personal to me. In 1996, I was carjacked, threatened with a gun while my babies were in the car. Thankfully, we turned out okay, but I knew I had to take action. I became an activist right away, an advocate for gun violence prevention, organized the Million Mile March, the largest gun safety movement at the time, and immediately, got to work. As Speaker, I oversaw the passage of a group of gun safety bills as Speaker in 2020. All 8 of then Governor Northam's priority bills passed out of the House, including an assault weapon ban. There was a lot of opposition to these bills, important bills, and in the end, we successfully the governor was able to sign 7 of the 8 bills passed out of the House. It was a huge, major victory for gun violence prevention in the Commonwealth. It included background checks, red flag laws, 1 handgun a month, lost and stolen firearm, and so much more. And obviously, these are top priorities. They were for me then. They will be in the future as well. Those bills that we passed in Virginia served as a model for the federal legislation, and we need to ban assault weapons in Congress.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah, I thank you. I was invited to the White House this past December with a group of other legislators from around the country to talk about my legislation around safe storage and around violence interruption that I carried this past year in the legislature. Fortunately, the House and the Senate both passed the my bills, but the governor sadly vetoed them. Just this past week, we saw a 7-month-old child get injured by another child because there was a gun in the household. So not only will I continue fighting for safe storage, but also for the rest of the work that we did in the General Assembly. I've been fortunate enough to be on the Judiciary Committee over the past 6 years, where I was part of the brick wall holding all the reforms in safety so that the Republicans could not roll them back. They tried, every single year since we passed them, they've tried to repeal them, and we did not allow them to get out of committee. Now I will fight. Thank you.
Crystal.
Yes, some of you know my personal story. I was witness to a murder of 4 people getting shot down as I sought cover. And this is really personal for me. I mean, I've coming back to the United States and seeing just the gun laws that we have here is quite terrifying. I think we absolutely need to ban assault weapons. We have to implement red flag laws. We have to make sure that we have universal background checks. We need to take out active shooter drills that we have in schools and make sure that our children feel safe. As a national security Democrat, I believe that it starts with public safety, safe neighborhoods, safe communities, a notion of feeling safe that is really much at the core of protecting the homeland. And so I think that we need to do more funding of gun violence research. In 2023, we had over 35,000 deaths by gun, and we have some of the highest rates in the world. And we just need to do better, I think, in the United States to make sure that we are creating a much more safer environment and making sure that we also have the code.
Suhas.
This is an important topic because, I've got 2 kids here. I don't want them growing up in Virginia in a community where active shooter drills, armed security, bulletproof windows and doors are the new normal in our schools. I will fight for the long overdue passage of a national assault weapons ban, expanded background checks, red flag laws, more protection for domestic violence victims, and more protections and more funding for local community violence intervention programs. But we have to have better gun laws. And, we've done a lot of great work in Virginia over the past 4 years, and I've been a part of that. But at the same time, if we do it state by state, you can go get an assault weapon in West Virginia and bring it back and use it in Virginia. So we have to have Congress acting on this issue. And I don't know why it's become a partisan issue. It's unfortunate, but we need Democrats elected. We need a Democratic majority in Congress in order to get this done. And so we have to keep this seat blue. And that's why I want to do this.
Dan.
Absolutely. As the husband of a public school teacher, as the father of 2 kids in our public schools, I can't accept a Commonwealth or a country in which the number 1 killer of kids is bullets, or one in which it's okay to carry weapons similar to those I carried in Iraq and Afghanistan for common use. That's why when in 2019, my delegate voted against every single common sense gun violence prevention measure in the General Assembly, even in the wake of the shootings at Virginia Beach, I took action and unseated him. That success allowed us to pass major gun violence prevention legislation, and I've carried on that track record to this day. I was the author of the first ever assault weapons ban to go to the governor, and this year, even with the Republican governor, was proud to be the co-lead of signed legislation banning Glock switches, something that turns a pistol into an automatic weapon, as well as holding parents accountable for if their children get access to a firearm they shouldn't have. I'll fight for that in Congress too.
Thank you, David.
So thanks, Haley. I think one of the things that you're finding in this, there's probably a lot of consistency in what our positions are, but I think one of the things that we have to recognize just as a society as a whole, and I encourage people to think about the gun safety issue as being something akin to like a computer, where it's like you have the hardware problem that we have to address, and we have the software part of the problem that we have to address also. As a member of the House Appropriations Committee, we put $28 million extra money into mental health services to be able to address that software portion of it. I will also say that I have supported and introduced a 1 handgun a month buyback program, as well as supported the assault weapons ban and also the universal background check. All the good things that we've done here in Virginia have to then be translated into what we need to be doing in Congress, because these are really national issues, not just state issues. And so I'm committed to being able to make those efforts and to be able to make those changes when I go to Congress and represent you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to our next question. Anti-Semitism is on the rise in the United States and around the world. Following President Trump's election, anti-Semitism and attacks on Jewish Americans and Jewish institutions dramatically increased, and they did so again in the aftermath of October 7th. 1 year ago, President Biden unveiled the first ever national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, which consisted of meaningful actions to be taken across the U.S. government to counter the scourge of hate. What are you doing to combat anti-Semitism in Virginia? And if elected, what measures would you support in Congress to combat anti-Semitism nationally? We'll start with Jennifer, followed by Crystal, Suhas, Dan, David, and then Eileen. Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. The incidence of anti-Semitism has been rising over the past several years. And I think all of us remember horribly in 2017 in Charlottesville when the neo-Nazis came and marched over the University of Virginia campus. There was an incident in Loudoun County in 2020, and a group of our community members came to me and asked me to help them with education, expansion of education, to talk about exactly to help the students understand what anti-Semitism is, what the Holocaust is. And so I sponsored legislation that expanded our history and social studies and civics curriculum that would tell the stories of our newer immigrants, including a strong focus on our Jewish and story of the Holocaust. We spent a year on that. There were stakeholders, students, parents, teachers. And unfortunately, the governor threw the package away, but I continue to work on education.
Crystal, thank you.
Yes. On a personal level, in high school, I was actually senior editor of the Holocaust Genocide Project. It was a magazine that we published to highlight in remembrance of the Holocaust. And we actually started an adopt-a-survivor program. So we had Holocaust survivors come to the school and share their stories. I think that was really important. That is something that I would actually want to implement in schools across Virginia. I think that it's important to remember your history and to make sure the youth know that. I actually traveled to Israel when I was 20 with the American Jewish Committee. I wrote a proposal to the Israeli Embassy and AJC on, the Jewish American and Indian American diasporic, anecdotes and about the both of the communities and discrimination that we face. And I got to actually go to Israel and to experience it from different levels: education, meet with Ministry of Defense, meet with people in different parts in Ashkelon, for example, and enjoy Sabbath.
Thank you, Suhas.
Thank you. When we had an incident in South Riding in my district in Loudoun County where anti-Semitic graffiti was drawn in a shopping area, and as well as racist and other, slurs. And we all came together for a vigil, an interfaith vigil. The community came together, and after that, I traveled to Israel as well to learn more about anti-Semitism around the world and what I could do about it. And one of the bills I brought was to help and require localities when there is anti-Semitic graffiti and hate speech like that to take it down immediately, because that hate speech was up for a long time, unfortunately. And then I brought legislation to add ethnicity to protected classes when it comes to hate crimes, to make sure that when there's, among other things, if there's anti-Semitic hate crimes, those are classified as hate crimes when there's anti-Semitic crimes. And so I'm going to continue to do that work in Congress.
Dan.
Yeah, this is an issue that is deeply personal to me. In my 2019 and again in my 2021 race, my Republican opponents trafficked in anti-Semitic tropes in 21 so vicious that the Washington Post editorial board weighed in, calling the anti-Semitism blatant. I have taken significant steps as a member of the General Assembly to combat anti-Semitism, particularly in a time when it is on the rise. And even in my children's own schools, we're seeing swastikas drawn on the walls and in the bathrooms. That's why this year I introduced bipartisan legislation to combat hate crimes in Virginia, working to make sure every member of leadership, Democratic and Republican, was on board, making sure that the governor also included it in his priorities, even though we come from different parties, and making sure it passed on a large bipartisan basis through the House. As your congressperson, that's exactly the kind of approach I'm going to take to anti-Semitism, making sure we have a national platform to combat it, that we take it seriously, and that we fight for equality at every level.
Thank you. David.
Haley, I want to go back to one of your earlier questions because I think it helps to inform this question. When you were talking about the things that Trump has been doing to bring forth the images of Hitler and the Reich and those type of things, we have to realize that that is not who we are as a nation. We have to be able to think about the foundation of who we are as a nation that has a respect for all religions. We've got to be able to live our values. And we have to really understand that when Trump and the MAGA Republicans are attacking, whether it's Muslims or Asians or women or anyone else, soon they will come and they will attack someone else. And that includes members of the Jewish community, members of other communities. And we have to be willing to stand up for that for everyone, because if we're not willing to do that, then at some point they will come for all of us. And this is something that has happened in the past. We've got to remember our history and be able to prevent that from happening again here in the United States. And those are things that I'm committed to.
Eileen.
Yes, this is, hopefully you can hear me. This is a really personal issue for me. As you all know, as the first Jewish speaker of the Virginia House of Delegates, I'm no stranger to anti-Semitic attacks. There are literally people, white nationalists, I should say, in federal prison today for plotting to assassinate me. The anti-Semitism has been loud and clear year after year. As recently as just a few weeks ago, put on social media, having somebody draw a Hitler mustache and blood dripping down my face and horns and all of that. It's a problem. It's continued to be a problem. We need to be loud and clear in opposition to it. What have we done? What can we do? I'll tell you, the IRA definition was a defining issue in my last year. The adoption of the IRA definition is part of an anti-Semitism bill. It took a lot of hard work and effort trying to bring people across party lines, and honestly, took a lot of hard work convincing members of my party to support it, but we got it through.
Thank you. On to our next question. Nearly 9 in 10 Jewish voters, 88%, believe abortion should be legal in all or some cases. This is an issue that transcends partisan politics nationally, which includes within the Jewish community. At the same time, a majority of Jewish voters know our rights are threatened by a Donald Trump-controlled Republican Party that would likely impose a national abortion ban, outlaw IVF, and restrict access to contraception. If elected, what steps would you take to safeguard reproductive rights? We'll start with Crystal, followed by Suhas, Dan, David, Eileen, and Jennifer. Crystal.
Yeah. On day one, I would codify Roe v. Wade. I think that we have to take the right to choose out of the hands of states and put it, in the federal government. I think it's ridiculous that in 2024 we still have to fight for this. I don't think that anyone should have the right to legislate on a woman's body. I know this personally, being a woman. It's very hard to understand what that would feel like if you're not a woman. I worked with UN Women. I've helped disenfranchised women around the world. I've actually helped to teach, sex education and teaching about reproductive health rights locally, nationally, and internationally. And I think that it's tragic to see, for example, in Arizona, that abortion got banned, and we can't have that continue. So I've been a big women's rights advocate for my entire career, and I think that the time is now to take a stand. We need strong female leadership, and it's important that we, make that known. And and protect women's right to choose.
Thank you, Suhas.
Yeah, I agree. Congress has to act now when it comes to reproductive rights and bodily autonomy. The Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs was just devastating, and we cannot let states like Alabama, Arizona, wherever it is, attack women's bodily autonomy and ban abortion, IVF, contraception. We have to make sure that no matter the person's zip code, women have access to affordable, reliable, and safe reproductive health care. And so I would absolutely defend abortion rights and codify Roe. I would also want to make sure we are that our health plans are covering contraception and some of these procedures as well. And I want to make sure that we're doing this at the federal level in Congress so that we don't have to worry state by state whether the person where they live is going to affect their access to reproductive care.
Thank you, Dan.
Absolutely. This is an issue that's very personal to me because after our second son was born, my wife's cardiologist told her to never get pregnant again or she could die. And I have a new nephew today after my sister's cancer diagnosis only because of IVF. That's why in Virginia, I've been a champion of reproductive rights, co-patroning a constitutional amendment to make sure that we protect abortion access in Virginia, leading on passing bills to ensure that Planned Parenthood clinics can dispense medication like birth control. And as the Washington Post says in its endorsement of me, before people were talking about it, trying to expand IVF coverage across the state. In Congress, I will be a champion, fighting to make sure we not only codify Roe v. Wade, but expand access to IVF, protect access to contraception, and ensure that as part of protecting our democracy, we ensure that women, not politicians, make their own healthcare decisions.
Thank you, David.
Haley, I think that this is one of those things that is really very important to me personally because I am the father of two adult women. And I remember when the Dobbs decision came down that they both came in and they were almost in tears about the concern about what was going to happen with their choices related to their body and their ability to make decisions about their reproductive rights. And that's something that's so very personal. It doesn't matter how old you become as a parent, they're still your children, and what they feel and how it hurts them also affects you. I will tell you that's the reason why when we talk about this on the campaign trail, that protecting democracy and protecting women's reproductive rights are so very intertwined because the Republicans want to undo the democracy, and then they also want to roll back women's reproductive choices. And a women's right to reproductive choice should not be determined by just arbitrary state borders. This is something that should be put into the federal code so that a woman in Alabama or Virginia has the same rights to reproductive choice.
Thank you. Eileen.
Absolutely. We know that abortion is on the ballot this year. We must codify Roe. I'm hearing it from voters all over the district, honestly, all over the political spectrum. I've always defended a woman's right to choose. As Speaker, I took on Republicans to repeal the extreme right-wing abortion restrictions and expanded access to birth control for Virginia women, including requiring all health insurance plans to provide year-long coverage of contraceptives. We absolutely have to stand up against MAGA extremists. I'm the candidate in this race who has fought Republican efforts in Virginia back in 2012 to when they were trying to shame women and harm access to abortion and contraception. On the House floor, I argued against a Republican transvaginal ultrasound bill and also shined a light on HB1, the personhood bill, and the effect that it would have on contraception. In the House, I also led the fight on abortion restrictions and how it conflicts with Jewish law, which respects the life of the mother. And those who oppose reproductive rights have never answered this question, and it has been asked over and over again.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. I've been an activist around reproductive health since the 1980s when I was a college student, having a debate between Sarah Weddington, the attorney in Roe v. Wade, and Phyllis Schlafly. But in the General Assembly, I have been the leader on reproductive health. I've carried the bills. I am the chief patron of the constitutional amendment to enshrine abortion care both this year and last year. I carried the whole women's health bill and access to reproductive health. I've been doing this for years, and it has been the number one issue in all of my races. This is going to be my 10th race in 11 years. We need to codify Roe, but we also need to make certain that we are taking all of the decisions around reproductive health back to the doctors, because we are seeing patients in other states where doctors are waiting until the woman is at her deathbed before they take action. I too had a very serious pregnancy-related illness, was told that I was about to die, had a kid in the NICU unit for 6 weeks, and told never to have another baby again. So this is very, very serious for many women and patients around the country.
Thank you. Okay, we will now move on to our fifth question. Since taking office, President Biden has created over 15 million jobs and significantly reduced unemployment, which is now at a 50-year low. Democrats in Congress played a crucial role in strengthening the economy by passing the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act, and expanding programs to grow the middle class while reducing deficits and prices. If elected to Congress, what policies would you champion to lower costs and support working families in Virginia? We'll start with Suhas, followed by Dan, David, Eileen, Jennifer, and Christy. Suhas.
Thank you. That's a great question, and I would continue some of the work I started in the General Assembly. I talked to so many people in my county, Loudoun and Prince William too, when I was representing it, and they talked about the cost of prescription drugs, for instance. And so one of the important policies that we passed was allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. And so it would be great if they could negotiate prices for more drugs. If we could expand upon that, it'd be great if we could address some of the issues caused by the Trump tax policies that he passed in 2017 that were really difficult for our deficit as well as on our tax system, and I think also led to increased costs as well for a lot of families. And I'd want to make sure that long term, that we have both a tax system as well as an economy that works for everyone. We have to rebuild the middle class. We have to be there for working families and expand, not cut the social safety net.
Thank you, Dan.
I think if you want to defend our democracy, you have to look at our economy. And when I talk to young people, I hear over and over again that they are concerned that they won't be able to get into the middle class. That's why in Richmond, I have fought to end junk fees. I have fought to force lowering of the cost of care by hospitals. I fought and successfully got the largest expansion of SNAP in Virginia history, which I authored. In Congress, I'm going to keep up that fight to make sure that we are giving every single American a pathway to the middle class, that as we expand our investments in green energy and in chips, that provides new and increased pathways for young people to get exciting jobs, to make sure we decrease fees and pass a national junk fees bill, and to make sure that we take seriously the ability of workers to join a union. That's why I was proud to vote against so-called right to work in Virginia and to be endorsed by so many unions who continue to offer a pathway to many Americans to get to the middle class.
David.
Haley, this is one of those items that's really very personal to me as well, because again, as the first person in my family's history, going back to the 1700s, living here in Virginia, to get a college degree, I know that a college degree can break that cycle of poverty that families have lived in for generations. Before I went to Richmond, no kidding, the cost of tuition at our state universities was going up 7, 10, 14% a year, greatly outpacing inflation. By me making this an issue, I will tell you that over the 5 of the last 7 years, we have held the cost of tuition to an increase of 0 or 1%, significantly below the cost of inflation. These are things where it's like we have not been making the investment in the Pell Grant like we have done in years past, and we've got to be able to do going forward. The other thing that I would like to talk about is, as the chairman of the Manufacturing Development Commission, I have worked to bring manufacturing jobs to Virginia so that we can shorten the supply chain and be able to have new jobs and be able to have products made here in Virginia and in the United States so that they're less expensive.
Eileen.
Thanks, Haley. in America, we'd like to think that if you work hard, you should have basic economic security and an opportunity to grow. It's really that simple. I know many families, as I spend a lot of time talking to folks, they're struggling to make ends meet, whether it's groceries or the cost of homes. And we hear and we say wages are up and unemployment is down, but we need to do more. As Speaker of the House in Virginia, I expanded affordable health care, was able to cap the price of insulin, raise the minimum wage. But prices are still too high and wages are still too low. So we need federal action. And in Congress, I'll continue to fight to make living in this country more affordable. We can implement legislation to lower prescription drug costs, finally raising the federal minimum wage. There is so much more that we can do. A consistent focus of my time in office was making Virginia more affordable for working families. And in 2020, as Speaker, was also helped pass an increase in minimum wage. And it was the first crucial step in the process of making living in the Commonwealth more accessible. And I also passed the G3 bill, tuition-free community college for low and middle students.
Thank you, Jennifer.
This has been the cornerstone of the work that I have done, reflecting back to my mom's experience with wage theft and dealing with pay inequity. I have focused on things like equal pay laws, getting wage salary history banned in Virginia, working on paid family and medical leave. We are the only industrialized nation in the world that doesn't have an official paid family and medical leave program. But I've also been the chair of the Broadband Advisory Council over the past many years, working on expanding access so that people have the ability to work in their communities and kids can get their education without having to go to McDonald's. I eliminated the grocery tax and the tax on menstrual products and diapers during my tenure. And I have been assigned as not only as budget conferee, making sure that we're investing in education and kind of out of the box ways of helping people find access to higher education, but also I will be looking at our tax policy in Virginia. We need to do that at the federal level as well, but expanding access to education, giving people the opportunity to have a seat at the table like collective bargaining are ways that we can expand our economy.
Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah, as a small business owner, I completely get it. I think we definitely need to have more tax incentives for small businesses. I will push for these tax incentives and for credits for small businesses here in VA10, especially for startups in their early stages. They really struggle a lot as they're trying to get government contracts. We need more infrastructure investment. We need to really put more into workforce development programs. I think we need to have more support for innovation and technology. And also, I know CHIPS Act was brought up. I actually worked with Intel CTO on CHIPS Act and making it more accessible for small businesses. And that's something that is, an initiative that Biden is pushing around the country. And we here in Northern Virginia have a great opportunity, especially with smart cities, IoT, AML, to really get into that. Sustainable development is something that I think we need to have, which is having more sustainable business practices that can lead to cost savings and long-term growth, and advocating for policies that.
Thank you. Earlier this year, a bipartisan coalition of senators negotiated a comprehensive immigration reform bill, which would have transformed immigration policy and enhanced security at our border. Donald Trump forced Republicans to kill the bill, and since then, there's been little progress on immigration reform and border security negotiations. What is your view of immigration policy, and what immigration, refugee, and asylum policies would you like to see changed and implemented if immigration reform was to go through? We'll start with Dan, followed by David, Eileen, Jennifer, Crystal, and Suhas. Dan.
Well, thank you. As the son of an immigrant, as the grandson of ancestors who came here as refugees, I know the power of our country as a welcoming place that provides refuge to those in need. And also, as somebody who spent my life defending our country, I understand the importance of our national security as well. I am tired of the demonization of immigrants and refugees. And at the same time, I know that we all collectively understand what the future of immigration policy ought to be. And when we were frustrated with our democracy and the failure to act of Congress, we're frustrated because we actually share much in common. One, we believe there ought to be a pathway to citizenship to those who came here as children and for many who came here for a long time. Two, we believe our immigration policy ought to be humane. And three, we know that we need secure borders. As your congressperson, I will fight for those common sense policies supported by most Americans.
Thank you. David.
Haley, this is a really good question because, again, at its foundation, we have to recognize that we are a nation of immigrants. All of us, with the exception of very few people, have come from some other place. And once we understand and we recognize that, this is actually an opportunity for us to be able to work across the aisle and be able to work with Republicans. And some people will think that that's not doable. But let me just give you an example. When you start talking to Republican farmers about being able to address H-2B visas so that someone can harvest their crops, they start sounding like Democrats wanting immigration reform. When you start talking about high-tech companies wanting to be able to bring in and address the green card quota system so that they can fill H-1B visas, those Republican business owners start to sound like Democrats because they want immigration reform. And also, very recently, Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, has said we need to have immigration reform so we can continue to build the ships of the Navy so that we can continue to be the world superpower. These are things that we have to be able to address, and we can work together on those things.
Eileen.
Earlier this year, a bipartisan group of senators negotiated and agreed on a border and immigration legislation. They kind of came to a deal. It was Republicans, it was Democrats alike. The legislation had even been supported by Border Patrol Union, but no surprise, Donald Trump was focused more on scoring political points than actually tackling the issue. And so rather than coming up with a bipartisan solution, he lobbied congressional Republicans to basically tank the legislation. And they continue to use immigration as a wedge issue. And there are, the solutions here basically is we need to bring people together. We need Republicans who have the political courage to stand up against Trump and work together. We strongly need comprehensive immigration reform legislation. We need it so that we can strengthen our asylum system. We need to focus on expanding legal pathways for migration and honestly protecting the U.S. refugee admissions program. And I would also support the passage of the Afghan Act to protect Afghan partners as well.
Jennifer.
Thank you. We live in a really robust, diverse community here in the 10th District, and it is incumbent upon us to continue to advocate for a fair and thoughtful immigration reform. I think my children were born right around the last time we actually did something meaningful in Congress. So I believe that we need to expand the number of attorneys and judges who can help move the paperwork. There are people who have to wait in line for, decades at this point to get their immigration moving. I think we need to be humane at the border, make certain, especially with our children and people who are more vulnerable, are not put in cages, but there are adequate bed space, which this last bill had an increase in bed space for those individuals. We need to make certain that we are thinking thoughtfully so that people who are coming here because they have been refugees, that they are in harm's way in their home countries, have a safe haven here, which is exactly what so many of our ancestors benefited from.
Crystal.
Yeah, as the daughter of immigrants, I'm committed to addressing this very complex issue that's both comprehensive but also humane. I think that we need to have comprehensive immigration reform. I would advocate for a clear and fair pathway for citizenship for undocumented immigrants who are contributing to our communities. This includes protecting dreamers. Dreamers are brought to the United States as children and they have no other home. I think that we need to modernize the asylum process. We need to secure the border smartly. We need to make sure we reunite families. We have to address, children, pregnant women, disabled people, folks who are senior citizens with compassion. Address the root causes of migration. I think it's important to be more proactive rather than reactive. Protect workers, ensure due process. Create a more merit-based system and really have community integration programs. I think if we can approach immigration in a much more comprehensive way, and one that's also more nuanced and with empathy and compassion, I think we can move forward to a better future. Thank you.
Suhas.
Yeah, I'm the son of immigrants, and if they had come, if the system now was the system then when they came to the U.S., they wouldn't have come to the U.S. That's the reality. It took them only a couple of years to get their citizenship. They were welcomed. Now it's we have a system where there's people in our community who lived here 10, 12 years on H-1B visas trying to get green card appointments, just can't get it. We need a comprehensive immigration reform. Donald Trump doesn't have a vote in Congress. It was Republicans who just decided that they had to follow whatever he said as a campaign strategy and as a as a strategy to keep themselves in office. They didn't have to vote no on that or kill that bill, but they made that decision themselves. We cannot continue to let this be a wedge issue. We have to process people, take more resources to process people more humanely when they try to come out the border. We also need to make sure that we're taking care of people who are trying to get a path to citizenship, that are highly skilled workers who've been in our community for a long time.
Thank you. And our final question. It has been more than 7 months since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th and killed more than 1,200 people and took an additional 240 hostage. More than 100 today are still in captivity in Gaza, including at least 5 Americans. In wake of this horrific terrorist attack, the Biden administration has supported Israel's strategic goal of dismantling Hamas, demanded the release of hostages, and aimed to increase the delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza. This is a multi-part question. Do you support the Biden administration's handling of the war? What is your position on the current U.S. policy on aid to Israel? And what do you feel is the best approach to bringing home the hostages? We'll start with David, followed by Eileen, Jennifer, Crystal, Suhas, and Dan. David.
So, Hallie, thank you again. This is one of those questions where it's like, I believe that my experience from having had a top secret clearance since 1988 and having dealt with a lot of these issues for the better part of several decades, I'm able to bring a very experienced view and a discussion to this. One of the things that we have to recognize is that that Israel has been our ally for the better part of 70 years. We have a responsibility to being able to work towards the dismantling of Hamas, but at the same time, we need to have a ceasefire. And then just beyond that, we've got to be able to define a way to rebuild Gaza. We've got to rely on our experience after rebuilding Europe from the Second World War so that we can de-radicalize these Palestinian youth so that they have another option as opposed to affiliating with Hamas. Then we need to be able to work towards a long-term two-state peaceful solution where both the Israeli people and the Palestinian people can live in peace together. That has to be our long-term goal.
Eileen.
What's going on, obviously, is devastating ever since October 7th. I think we all know exactly where we were when we read and heard, and the pain continues to this day. I'm really pleased with how President Biden has been so incredibly supportive of Israel, its right to self-determination, its right to defend itself in light of the atrocities of a terrorist organization, more specifically Hamas, and its recognition that what's going on day to day is devastating for all people involved. And everybody mourns the loss of children or innocents. I believe strongly that Hamas is a terrorist organization whose goal and focus is the destruction of the state of Israel and Jewish people. Palestinians who have lived in Gaza have suffered under the barbaric rule of Hamas for far too long. They are used as human shields. We must continue to support Israel, and we must ensure that the humanitarian aid is provided for Gazans, and we must have an end to this war, return of the hostages, and we must start figuring out who is going to be in charge of assuming Hamas is out.
Jennifer.
Thank you. I think I agree. We all remember October 7th and how horrified we all were, the pain of the individuals, the families. I've had conversations with my constituents, with my friends, and I mourn along with them. I also mourn and was, I think, the first elected official in Virginia to call for a ceasefire and a diplomatic solution, returning all of the hostages. And I continue to be in that stance. I believe that violence is not the answer to this, that I think it plays into the hands of Hamas. We are seeing now, a generation of people who are dying, and we need to have a thoughtful, strategic, diplomatic solution, multilateral, to help come in and stop this violence, make certain that Hamas is stopped from harming anyone else, but no more harm on any of the innocent people who have nothing to do with this geopolitical disagreement. Thank you.
Crystal.
Thank you. I actually co-led an ISIS crisis counter-terrorism cell, and I have worked with the Israelis in the Department of Defense. I've had a top secret SCI clearance with a polygraph for most of my career. I think that Israel has a right to defend itself. I condemn the attacks that occurred on October 7th. I call for a ceasefire with the release of hostages. And I think that, the approach has definitely been a bit broader. And I would advocate more for a scalpel versus sword approach to really try to micro-target, for those who are within these terrorist pockets, because I have experience in doing that. And I have had the opportunity to go to Israel with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies as a fellow. I was a national security fellow with them. And I've gotten to meet with, the Israeli security and defense officials. I've actually gone to the Iron Dome personally. So I know that there is very sophisticated technology and a very sophisticated defense apparatus. And Israel is and will continue to be our ally.
Suhas.
It's been a terrible situation. I actually had the opportunity to visit Kafaza kibbutz in 2022 and to see what happened just to the community there that I'd really grown to know and stayed in touch with was terrible. And it's from the unprecedented attack on Israel on October 7th to the humanitarian situation now in Gaza. I want to see an end to this war, and I'd like to see a situation that involves the enduring defeat of Hamas, humanitarian assistance for civilians, and facilitating security in the region through a two-state solution long term. Hamas can't be one of the states, and I support us funding humanitarian assistance in Gaza as it rebuilds and for Israel.
Thank you. And Dan.
Yes. Conducting counterterrorism operations around the world, I saw how central to U.S. national security interests the U.S.-Israel relationship is. And in the wake of October 7th, I am proud of the fact that we have stood strong with our democratic ally in Israel in the face of unprecedented attacks by Hamas, who seeks not only to kill civilians deliberately as they did on October 7th, but openly advocates for the genocide of all Jews. I believe strongly that in most cases, the Biden administration has done well by supporting the U.S.-Israel relationship. And where I have disagreements, it's there where we have allowed disagreements between allies to potentially become opening for enemies. I believe strongly in the continued provision of aid to Israel. I believe the best approach to seek the release of the hostages is for us to continue maximum pressure on Hamas to ensure that they understand that until they let the hostages go, Israel will continue its fight. And we need to make sure that we restore a just peace that recognizes the aspirations of both peoples.
Thank you all for your responses to these questions. You will now have the opportunity to give a 90-second closing statement. We'll start with Eileen, followed by Jennifer, Crystal, Suhas, Dan, and David. Eileen.
Thank you again, Haley and JDCA. I appreciate everybody for taking the time to listen with us today. And I appreciate the substantive discussion on so many issues. It was valuable, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with you. Again, I'm running for Congress because I believe now more than ever we need women on the front lines defending our rights and our freedom. And as I mentioned earlier, Tikkun Olam is a guiding principle in my life, my family, and my politics. And it's a big part of why I'm running for Congress. I believe our world and our nation and its democracy needs repair now. As the first woman to be Speaker of the House, I led the way for transformational change here in the Commonwealth, from rolling back extreme right-wing abortion restrictions to protecting our democracy, passing gun violence prevention, safety reform, and so much more. We fought back against anti-Semitism. We made it illegal to discriminate against somebody based on who they are or who they love. We put the Commonwealth back on a path to carbon neutrality and so much more. But there is much more repair in our world, and much of it will take change at the federal level. So I'm running for Congress to make that change, to ensure that zip code does not determine access to reproductive health care, to stop the sale of assault weapons, fighting climate change, and protecting our democracy. You can learn more about me at Eileen for Congress, EILEENFORCONGRESS.com. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and it's been a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Haley, and everybody at the JDCA. It's been a lovely conversation tonight, and I appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you all. I come from a family that struggled when I was young. My mom endured wage theft, where she was actually paid after a full month of working with a couple of sleeping bags as her salary. I don't know how she made ends meet, but somehow she did. She made it her priority to make certain that I got a college education, that I could stand on my own 2 feet. And I've used my personal experience to do the right thing for other people who are often left out at the table, who don't have a seat. And so passing things like working on the Virginia Values Act for our LGBTQ community. Now my daughter is engaged to her girlfriend and they're going to get married next year. I am the person who got collective bargaining through the General Assembly. I have been the person at the front of the pack on reproductive health care, which has been the number one issue in all of my races. And the head of things like transportation and broadband. I've got a broad and wide policy background. I have passed over 62 bills in the General Assembly, and they are now into law. I'm concerned about what's going on at the federal level. That is why I decided to step out of my comfort zone, to step up for this. I've represented more people in this district than anyone else. I've had more elections in this district than anyone else. And I know how to campaign, and I know how to lead, and I know how to get things done. Thank you.
Thank you. Crystal.
Yes, thank you so much, JDCA, for having us. This has been a great discussion. I'm Crystal Call. I'm a National Security Democrat. I've done my service with the Department of Defense and with the intelligence community. I had the opportunity to work with Secretary Austin when he was General Austin at U.S. Central Command. As I said, I helped to co-lead the ISIS Crisis Counterterrorism Cell. I worked with Secretary Mattis when I was a director at the DoD. I've worked with the most senior defense policymakers of this country. I've worked on emerging trends technology with the CIA. I think that coming in with real world policy experience, understanding the intersection of defense and technology is really important, particularly in VA-10 and particularly here in Loudoun County, as we're in Data Center Alley. I understand a lot of the on-the-ground issues that we face here. I have worked, as I said, with UN Women. I understand reproductive health freedoms and how that is under jeopardy right now, and the fact that we have to codify Roe v. Wade. We have to take a stand. I have seen the effects of gun violence, having lived in conflict zones around the world. I have in-country experience in about 71 countries, and I've done doctoral field work for when I was studying at Brown University. Coming back here, I know that we have to have common sense gun safety laws. We need to make sure we have safer neighborhoods, and we have to fight MAGA extremists. I resigned in protest of Donald Trump because I saw what he was doing to this country, and we have to uphold democracy. So I'm coming in not as a career politician, but as someone that has really lived the life of people here in VA-10, and I'm also a small business owner. I understand the challenges that our economy faces here. Thank you for your time today.
Suhas.
Thank you for having us today. This was a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to, I wanted to run because I wanted to take on some of these tough problems and the dysfunction in Washington. This was one of the worst Congresses ever. And a lot of it is because of, the extremism in our politics now, and the Freedom Caucus essentially running Congress now. And I think our community deserves better. And these things are personal to us. When there's a government shutdown, that means our food pantries are giving me calls telling me to post on social media because they're getting overrun, and people are living paycheck to paycheck. And this is the community where my family immigrated, my kids were born, my wife and I got married, and when I got elected to the General Assembly to represent Loudoun and Prince William, I took on really hard fights like rising costs, gun violence, prescription drug pricing, fights that people said I couldn't win, and I won. Because that's what our community needed. So I look at Congress now, I see more tough challenges like the ones we talked about today that people are saying we can't overcome. And I see a problem that I think I can solve. And I'm doing it, not for no other reason than, my girls deserve a better future, and our community deserves a better future. And I don't just care about the next 2 years. I care about the next 20 years for our community, because this is home for me. So I look forward to hopefully serving you in Congress, and please stay in touch if I can be helpful with anything that you're working on.
Dan.
As the grandson of Holocaust survivors, my family knows that democracy is fragile. I didn't know till I was a teenager that the Seder liturgy didn't actually end with God bless America. My family history is why I went to West Point, served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and have spent most of my life defending our democracy. It's why after Donald Trump was elected, I went on television in 2018 and said that after 9/11, the greatest threat to our democracy lived in a cave, and now the greatest threat to our democracy was Donald Trump. My concern for our democracy is why in 2019, I ran against and unseated a 17-year Republican incumbent who had voted to criminalize abortion and voted against every single common sense gun violence prevention measure. My concern for our democracy is why, after the attacks on January 6, 2021, I wrote the bill to ban January 6 insurrectionists from holding office. And why, after an extreme Supreme Court voted to overturn Roe v. Wade, I led the effort in 2023 to flip the state house in Virginia and protect abortion access here in our Commonwealth. The reason the Washington Post has endorsed our campaign is because they know that Virginia 10 voters are looking for a fighter who will stand up and defend our democracy and turn around and pass effective legislation. And so I hope if you're interested in learning more about that fight, you come and visit our website, danhelmer.com, and get involved. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Haley, JDCA, thank you so much for doing this today. These forums are so very important for us to be able to outreach to the community and be able to share our views and our vision for what we want to be able to do as your next congressperson. I think that you've probably found through this that there's a lot of similarities in policy positions from all of us. What I want to talk about is 5 things that I think you need to be looking at as you're making a decision about who you're going to elect in June and then hopefully represent you in November. And the first one is those personal lived life experiences. As I've said before, I grew up very poor. I lived in an orphanage, went to go live with foster parents when I was 16. These things inform my decision-making every day. Unlike a lot of other people in this group, I've actually lived in Loudoun County for 24 years. My wife and my daughters went to the public school system here, and they still call it home. When I won in 2017, I won by the largest margin of victory of anybody running against an incumbent Republican, and no one has equaled that margin of victory since then. So when we're looking at selecting somebody in June, we want to be looking at who can win and win big in November. Because of that, I've been able to pass 50 bipartisan pieces of legislation. And finally, I'll share with you again that I have had a top secret clearance since 1988, and I'm dating myself now, when there was still a Cold War. That level of experience is what we need to be able to have someone move from the state level to dealing with national and international issues. And I'm prepared to be able to represent you in Congress. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. We greatly appreciate it. And thanks to all of our candidates for being with us today. And thank you all for joining us for today's forum. While we touched on some of the issues of importance to Jewish voters, we didn't have time to get to everything, and we encourage everyone to learn more about the candidates' positions by visiting their websites and to visit jewishdems.org to learn about our positions, our policy platform, our advocacy efforts, and how we are engaging and mobilizing millions of Jewish voters in advance of the November election. I'd now like to invite JDCA board member and policy committee chair Tom Kahn to wrap up today's forum.